Hey everyone, Mike the Beast here, and I have a very special guest here tonight. Please welcome Jason Douglas from SourcePoint Press. Jason, how's it going tonight?
It's going well. Thank you very much for having me. This is going to be great. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So you are a comic book writer. What talk about your influences? Growing up, what got you, into comics, and what made you want to, go into the writing world?
And I'm sure we'll get to this. Like my origin story when it comes to writing this book and publishing this book is very atypical, but I think my own comic book origin story is pretty darn typical. Got into it a little bit late, right? I didn't have the older brother or the cool kid who lived down the street or like a cousin or something who said like you need to be checking this out. So I came to basketball cards and baseball cards and comic books and music like late. Not until I was like 12 and then kind of 13. But when I fell hard and was a pretty, deep dive comic book nerd for a handful of years there. And then did that also very typical story thing where I kind of in my mid to late teens walked away for almost 9 years and kind of left it behind and then walked back into shops in my mid 20s and haven't looked back since and am even more of a collector slash reader fiend than I've ever been before. When I was a kid, it was I'm old enough where I was there for the 90s boom. And so pre-variant cover trend was the enhanced embossed die cut silver foil cover trend. And I was there for all of that. And Batman's backpack getting broken and Superman and dudes in suits waiting in line at the local comic shop in front of me because they needed to buy 50 copies because that was their retirement fund, and then the whole thing falls apart. That was like my era. And what's funny is back then and even now, I think like as a comic reader and collector, I'm split pretty evenly 50-50 down the middle, where half of me is very purely like appreciating and following like my favorite authors or my favorite artists and looking at, finding some depth and meaning in what I'm going to be reading and then rereading. And then there's really this even other split of me where I'm trying to complete a run and I'm looking for that key and I'm looking for that thing that's going to go up in value. And it's like, it's kind of conflicting, but I balance both of them pretty much down the middle. And I was kind of the same way as a kid, like not knowing what I was doing. I was hunting for number one issues when I was like 12. And then of course getting just like, garbage number one issues. And like the number one was most important. But at the exact same time, I'm kind of like finding publishers and artists and writers and characters and storylines that I dig regardless of, collectability. And my first deep dive of my own outside of like Marvel and DC and Batman and Wolverine and fancy covers and number ones was I got heavy into the vintage and original Valiant universe.
Awesome,
So
awesome.
like early 90s, like that was my thing. Like my pull list at my LCS was every single Valiant title every week. And I would like ride my bike the 5 miles there and get my pull, and it was all Valiant books, and then bike all the way home like in the brown paper bag. Now I wasn't smart enough to put the bag in a backpack. I would bike the 5 miles home with the bag clutched in my hand, like on the handlebar, which is a very inefficient way to ride your bike. But anyway, so it was like Valiant books, and it was like the stories. It was Barry Windsor Smith art and the Jim Shooter and Bob Layton stories and stuff like that, and just digging that. Not as big as the Marvel shared universe, but very tightly woven shared universe, and fell in love with that, and then kind of stepped into like my first kind of mature, like, oh my God, I'm digging this for art's sake, was Neil Gaiman's Sandman. A bit, early for how old I was, but like fell in love with it anyway. And then weirdly, and you can actually see two original pages behind me over here, was
Oh,
Sandman
awesome.
Mystery Theater, which not aimed at a 14-year-old boy, but fell in love with that too. And in fact, when I took that like that kind of typical 9-year hiatus, the only two books that followed me through that and that I reread as comics during that time were Neil Sandman and Art Spiegelman's Mouse. And then kind of coincidentally, it was Neil who actually brought me back into shops when he published, like in what was it, 0304, Marvel 1602. And it was like his first comic that he had put out in quite some time. It was strictly novels for a while before then. And that's actually what brought me back into shops and got me hooked again and got me to the state I am today, which is a basement with probably a few too many long boxes.
We're all there in more ways than more ways than one. That's awesome, and I love hearing the Valiant, because I'll admit, I've never really looked into the Valiant universe, but it's a universe that really doesn't get brought up, within the community that much.
Well, it was so, I don't know. I think what attracted me to it, without maybe being able to vocalize it at the time, I don't know if I had the language or the sophistication to say this at the time, but I truly believe it was the fact that it wasn't image art. And don't get me wrong, I was still going and at least trying to read every single Valiant or image title, because it was a big deal. But it like the art was more realistic, the storytelling was more realistic, it was a bit more grounded, even though it was still very fantastical and superhero based and whatever. But it not every single character was unrealistically portrayed with muscles that are on top of muscles on top of muscles. And again, not me as a kid going, oh, I don't like that, but there was just something appealing about it being a bit more grounded, at least in that respect, and being attracted to that. So I love that universe. Now, I kind of walked away from it right before its downfall, and like Acclaim bought the company, and most of the original crew that put that company together had left by that point. And it kind of petered out. And that's why some of those later issues have a bit more value, because the print run just like dropped to nothing. But I've since gone back, of course, no surprise to you probably, and collected every single issue that Valiant ever published. And we'll get around to rereading all of those someday, and hopefully not destroying my childhood love of it in the process. But that's kind of what attracted to me originally, at least.
Gotcha. And you did mention the big two. You mentioned Batman, Wolverine. So were you a Batman, X-Men guy, or so? What other comics were you reading?
Well, actually, I mean, so I've been asked, and I've thought about, like, what was your first comic and that kind of thing, and what got you in. It's really two things. And the first was there were these 3-packs that you could get like at certain stores, at certain drugstores, and at certain at Meijer, and I like an equivalent to a Walmart back then, which we didn't have, but like the 3-pack, and you could see the two on the outside, you couldn't see the one on the inside. And in those, there was some Spider-Man and some Batman, and this one G.I. Joe with a boat chase that I vaguely remember that were kind of my first there. But my actual first comic wasn't even in the format of a comic. There was I had this mass market trade paperback, like a little pocket you stick in your back pocket book, black and white reprint of some Claremont X-Men stories from early 80s. And it was the first arcade story, which is like 2 or 3 issues, and then the Mutant X Proteus, Moira McTaggart's son run, right? Where he's like possessing people and melting reality all around. And the weirdest thing about the way this book was published was, so it's this tiny little book, and it's in black and white, and there's only 2 panels on a page. So it's not even the size of panels or the layout of panels of the original issues. It's literally just those panels then transcribed onto that cheap paper, and one kind of in a corner and one kitty corner adjacent to it below, and 2 on each page. So it doesn't even read like the pacing of a normal comic, but it's still the golden age of X-Men.
Oh, of course.
Or that just that fantastic part of that, right in the middle of that fantastic run. And so that kind of wet my whistle there too. So like when I started, going and getting floppies at a shop myself, I was very much attracted to X-Men and the X books at that time, and I kind of stepped in right around and right before Executioner Song, which is like maybe the worst place to step in because it's like it's confusing for people who know what's going on, and then you stepping in that, and all you know is the classic new X-Men team from late 70s, early 80s, and you're trying to figure out what's going on with Strife and Cable, and good lord,
Yeah.
like it hurt my brain, but I loved it anyway.
Now, did you watch any of with the '90s during that time? I was, growing up in the '90s, and we had those awesome animated shows. Did you watch any of the Marvel, DC, or even like the Spawn show?
So like because I'm a little older, like I was there for animated X-Men, which was fun and good because I loved it, but Batman the animated series was definitely my show because not only did I love it, but like it's like legit good. It's
Yeah,
it's not that thing where, I look back at my youth and I'm watching Transformers and G.I. Joe and stuff like that. And you go back and I don't want to upset anybody, but they're garbage. They are not good. I mean, they're commercials to sell toys, and the stories are horrible, and the animation is not good. And Batman the Animated Series was like legit. I mean, the writing and the animation and the plotting on that show is like classic, and to the point where I don't know if you remember this, but there was a point for a long time where there was that debate about, uh, you know, is that the best Batman?
yeah,
Because not everybody loved Michael Keaton, and you were kind of in the middle of who, in retrospect is pretty good now, especially with what came after before Christian Bale gets on board. But like there was that debate for a while when the Batman franchise was like tanking. They're going, I think maybe that voice actor in that portrayal might be the top one.
yeah. Kevin Conroy just
Yeah, there you
really
go.
got into that
Thank you.
character. He's great, and th- I agree with all of that. That show, as a I was, geez, so I was born '92, so I got a lot of it in syndication,
Yeah,
after it aired. But as a kid, just a lot of the stuff because they've re-released it on Blu-ray and it's on HBO Max now. And there's so many watching it now. It's amazing how many things I missed, but have just made it that much better. I loved it because you get to see Batman go up against the Joker, and you had Mark Hamill's Joker. That's
yes,
how I was introduced to the Riddler, the Penguin, all his rogues, and Scarecrow scared the crap out of me in that show.
right,
Uh,
right.
those nightmare episodes, they so that show is unlike anything I was watching as a kid because I was just past the Transformers and GI Joe and even Ninja Turtles. I was young, so I was watching the Spider-Man animated show, Power
Yeah,
Rangers, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and Batman was probably so much different than those shows. Granted, different universe, but just those characters. That's what really showed me that there's a lot more than the just guys in tights, fighting, crime. There's that in that show. Watching it now too, what the topics they get into and stuff is really amazing when you look back at it.
agreed.
Um, so flash forwarding a little bit. So what? How did Parallel come to be? Parallel's origin story, if you will. Were you Did you have that idea first? Did you go to Source Point Press, and is that where you guys, was there a group of people that developed it? Talk about how Parallel and your journey to Source Point Press.
So the story itself, I wrote the first half of this completely and utterly in a bubble. And what I mean by that is with no definitive plans about what would come next, no attachment to anything. It was literally, it is time to write this. I had a public school teacher in my day job. This summer was the summer I was going to finally do this pursue this lifelong dream. And the story, the idea of a dark sci-fi tale about parallel worlds, about an alternate you, and what they might offer for second chances, had been sitting for a handful of months. The dream of doing this sat there for decades. So it's one of these things where very much like the themes of parallel about dreams deferred, right? Like at its core, it's wrapped in in the dark sci-fi construct, right? And the especially in the second half, the crescendo of kind of of dread and harm that's going to come to our main character. But at its root, like thematically, what it's about is that anxiety and stress and stagnation that comes to a lot of people of a certain age. In this case, Landon's like experiencing his quarter life crisis, where he had those dreams that you have in your late teens, early 20s, that because the world is in front of you and infinity of time is in front of you, we tend to defer because we always have tomorrow and we can always come back to it. But life steps in and you've got that bill to pay, so you take that job temporarily, right? And then you wake up and it's been 5 years, it's been 8 years, and suddenly maybe it's too late, right? And time just keeps on marching forward. And here I am way past that point going, it's just going. And yet that wasn't enough to motivate me to sit down to write it, right? So like that just keeps on. So there's a third piece that comes together, and the actual catalyst. So the sci-fi part of it is there. My own desire, my own existential dread about time passing and not accomplishing a dream that I'd always had, it's all there, but not enough to lock it in. And what kicked in was, I've been a teacher long enough where I've got former students that are, Landon's age, maybe a little bit older. And it was a conversation with a couple of former students who like reached out to me and we're talking about going through that version of what the story is about, but in their own lives, and about how they had these dreams at 21 and now they're pushing 30. And is it too late? Why am I not in that place that I always knew I was going to go, doing that thing I wanted to do, whatever that dream was, whether it, in the case of Landon, it's music, right? Whether it's writing, whether it's, doing a show online, whether it's dancing. One of my ones was like, wanted to be in a dance studio, opening our own dance studio in Chicago. And it's like, it didn't happen. Why not? How did this happen? How did all that time go? And those three things just locked in together. And I was like, okay, it's time. And what I had been doing before that is I was actually writing. I had plays published, and I was writing plays and skits for drama clubs that I was running at the middle school level and the elementary school level. Okay. Awesome. And I kind of like stumbled into that because of budget cuts and then needing this. And I stepped into that void, and us not having a budget said, well, I can't afford to buy a play for these kids, so I'll just write one. And I got pretty good at it, right? Like, and I had been doing that for years and years and years. And so I got to this point where these confluence events come together and motivations come together. And so I took a summer off from writing a play, which I was doing like once a year. I said, this is the year I'm going to write a comic book. And it was really just that. It's so, there's such irrational confidence in how I did this, because I'm just like, yeah, I'll just do it like that. Like, you just do it. And I was like, well, I can do this other thing. So of course I can write a comic. And, again, blissful ignorance of, had I known how hard it would be, had I known what was involved, had I known what a actually much more complicated beast writing a comic script is than even like a stage play or prose. I mean, it's a very different animal. That might have scared me off again, in the same way that there wasn't enough motivation to get me off my butt and sit down to type for almost 20 years. I could have seen myself, if I had known what sitting down alone in that bubble to write that first half of that script would have entailed. I could have seen that kind of pushing me back again, but I didn't have that frame of reference. So I just did it. And it was exciting. It was an adventure. And there were so many things that you had to concentrate on. Not only is it a different type of writing, down to the form of like, you literally have to hit indent a different number of times to get to the point where you then have to say sound effect versus, a speech bubble versus a timestamp versus narration, like all those little things that are in there. Not only do you have to balance all that, but you've got to balance pacing in a way that you don't have to on a stage play, because it's fairly linear there. And here you've got the pacing of story, the pacing of dialogue, and you got to balance that with the pacing of panel layout too. Do you want that reveal to be on a facing page, on the flip page? Do you need that panel to be bigger for artistic effect, for pacing effect, to slow something down, to zoom something in. There's like, to me, it felt there was like a dozen plus more things to keep balanced in your head. Plus, you're trying to balance a story and the themes and what you want to get across, and whatever other ideas you've got. And actually, I think, and I don't think I've ever even said this out loud before, but I think that maybe not having any definitive long-term expectations when I was still in the much more of a learning, feeling out, but still building phase at that beginning when I'm doing it in the bubble, that might have been helpful. Because there was, like, look at what I'm trying to say is, there was so much to think about and so much to balance and so much to learn, that having a company that's saying, giving you a deadline, or having an editor who's involved at that point, all of that stuff came later, and working directly with an artist. And all those things were wonderful when I wrote the second half. But having it in the first half, that I don't know if that would have helped me or not, knowing the naivety I was coming from and just kind of the experimental nature and feeling my way through it that it was.
Gotcha. So like that freedom almost helped you in a way, instead
Yeah,
of
I think
having.
so. I think so. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, I'm literally thinking that through. You could probably see me on the screen there, like, you could probably see the gears turning. But yeah, that sounds right.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, how long did it take to, write it once you
Well,
kind of were getting
yeah,
the hang of
yeah. So,
the
so, so, like, I pretty much, I mean, I pretty much took that summer, and that was like, kids are going to swim lessons and whatever, and they're in the pool for an hour, so I'm sitting there hacking away for an hour. And I took most of that summer to write the first half of the book, the first 32 pages of it, which in my mind at the time was a big oversized first issue. And obviously, like, as you know, it eventually morphed into like a 64-page one shot small graphic novel. Um, but I got to that halfway point, and I was like, okay, I'm going to stop here for a minute, because I know where it's going. A lot of time and effort has gone into it, and I think it's good. I think this works. I think this isn't actually a thing. I now want to, before I put another X amount of time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears into it, I want to see if anybody else in the world thinks it's real too. And so I kind of did ignorance is bliss again. I was like, well, I will look up a bunch of companies online, a bunch of publishers online, and let's just explore what the submission policy is and blah 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 blah. So I'm pretending like I'm doing a 21st century thing, because internet's about to be involved, but it's really archaic what I'm doing, because I'm ignoring or not really seeing the reality that I've come to understand now, that this is that you want to get a comic out in the world, like 90% of all small press stuff starts as crowdfunding, right? And I'm just ignorant of that as the day is long at this point. So I'm literally looking at companies, submission policies, and it was discouraging. Is probably an understatement, right? Because most companies don't have an open submission policy, and those that do don't want your script; they want your art. Which you don't want my art, because it's not good and really doesn't exist. And at best they want a pitch with art, and that's not what I had. I had 32 pages of something that I thought was good, but nowhere to put it. And again, not kind of being blissfully ignorant of the way it normally goes in this part of the 21st century, I went archaic again, but didn't give up. And what I literally did is I went into my classroom and I grabbed a small stack of, like the manila file folders that teachers keep their stuff in, and made packets with cover letters and a pitch and the script and all this stuff, and literally put it together with beautiful color paper clips from my desk drawer, and I took a stack of these to the next Motor City Comic Con, which is like my local con, my local big con, with this idea that I would just kind of sight unseen walk up to booths that belong to small publishers and say, here you go. again, not knowing that this is not how it's done anymore. And I walked in there, and I had this short list. I go, okay, I think I could go here, I could go here, I could go here. And the first one I saw, and it grabbed my eye because they put up a beautiful, beautiful booth at every con, was Source Point Press. And I started walking towards it, and I kind of this dude caught my eye, and I started walking towards him. He was behind the table, looked like he knew what he was doing, and had the most glorious red beard you've ever seen in your life. And I walk up to this guy, and it just happens to be Travis McIntyre, who is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Source Point Press. and he's the guy who I'm like, hello, and I'm like, here you are, and here is my whatever. And in my nervousness and in my kind of naive, again, irrational confidence, but still being terrified at the same time, I don't think at the moment I was noticing how sideways he was looking at me and how the smirk coming behind his glorious red beard was there. But at some point, he's just like, I kind of like the cut of your jib. I'm going to read this. I like your hustle. I like what you're doing here today. You come back and see me tomorrow. I'm going to give this a read tonight, and we'll see what we've got here. And he was like, and I came back the next day, and he's like, all right, let's do something. Here's what I see. He said, this was really weird. You caught me off guard. I really like the way you approached me. It feels like you were trying to pitch me a comic like you lived in 1971. And I was like, yeah, apparently I just don't even know how this is done. And that's why I did it. But it like caught his attention. And he's the one who really, really guided me through these first steps of things I wouldn't know. So in the way that most comics get made today on a small level is you're finding your artist, you're getting that crowdsourced funding, and you're putting it together, and then maybe a publisher will pick it up. And Travis just like guided me through that. He made the decisions about, it's going to be a 64-page one shot. Can you go write me 32 other pages? And I'd like, yes, I can, whether I knew I could or not.
Of course.
It's like those actors who it's like the actors who had an audition are like, can you ride a horse? And they're like, absolutely, I can ride a horse. They're like, I've never even seen a horse. I was like, yes, I can do this. And he hooked me up with the contract. He hooked me up with the great Adam Travis. He set me up with Bob Sally, my editor, who's a brilliant writer in his own right. You know what I mean? And like he set up all those steps, which is very atypical. And then I got to write the second half of this book. The story was already there. Like I knew what was going to happen in the second half, but then I got to live really the first and one of the greatest of if you're a fanboy and you've ever wanted to create, you've read your back matter, you've heard your interviews with creators, and what does every comic book writer say is one of the most glorious things you can do as a comic book writer is you get to write for an artist. You get to see your words become better than what you saw in your head. And that's what I got to experience with Adam. I got to see his sample pages, and I got to see his character sketches, and my brain that already knew what the second half was exploded with more possibility, because I was like, oh my God, if this guy can do that, I can make it darker than I thought I was going to make it, right? I can intensify that scene and make that crescendo where Landon's got to make a pretty intense decision about his own self-care mentally and physically, because he wants this other shot, and the other him is offering him a second chance, but it ain't a good thing for his mental and physical health in the here and now. I can write that scene in a way that I don't know that I could before, because Adam can do something with that visually that I know it can happen. So I got to write for an artist that it got darker, it got more intense. It allowed me to play with form and play with theme on a deeper level, because Adam could do the rest and do more. And bring it to life in a way that no matter what I saw in my head when I was writing that first half, this expanded it exponentially. And it was legit magical to get to do that.
That's awesome. And that I'm a musician, not as much during the pandemic, but when you said that, it made me think of, I write songs, I play guitar, but when I finally get to hear what the drummer's going to do with that, because I'm lucky, fortunate to surround myself with very, very talented, musicians. So I get giddy, and I can't wait to hear what the drummer, the bass player, the lead guitarist is going to do with these songs. And then when you play the song or you hear what they have, and that feeling is like no other. Son, you couldn't even imagine in the best possible way. So
there's some irony to that, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. Like if you ever studied Greek philosophy in school, the idea is supposed to be pure. Like whatever comes out of, it's the famous, I can't remember if it's Socrates or Plato or maybe even Aristotle, but like the idea, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like if you have an idea of a chair in your head, the vision of it in your head is perfection, and anything that manifests in the physical world is going to be, by definition, by Greek philosophy definition, less than, right? And yet, it blows you away when you see it in your head and it's perfect in your head, and then an artist like Adam makes it better. Like it's not supposed to work that way, and that's why when it happens, it's like the writer's dream. It's like you made it. Not only did you make it real in a way that, because I can't draw, I can't. And so thank you for that gift. But like you made it better. Like it's kind of incomprehensible to me, and literally a bit of magic each and every time. And it made every page that rolled in, right? Like every penciled page and then every finished page was just like a bit of like fanboy fever dream, where you're going, are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Not only does it exist, but it's better than it exists in my head. This is awesome. I loved that process. I mean, it took a long time. That's something else, is that this has really, really changed how I read comics now, because the blood, sweat, and tears and the time and effort that went into it, and the whole process going from idea to writing to the art to the lettering to the publishing to the design to the publishing and then like the promotion, it's such a longer and more work intensive with more people than even me, who wasn't just completely ignorant of it as a younger person, but like certainly not seeing as much of the time and effort that went into it as I do now. It really, really makes me read comics in a different way with a deeper level of appreciation, I think.
That's awesome. That's truly awesome. So you're seeing all of Adam's art come through, and what happens? How much communication, or it was as simple as he saw the script and then he just went to town, or was there any or a lot of communication between that?
Yeah. There was like anytime he had a question, he's reaching out to me, and we're either emailing or texting or calling each other or FaceTiming, or occasionally it had to be a little more intense than that, and I've got to send. Oh God, the worst thing was when there was something that, even in my very verbose, overly wordy, descriptive style on what this panel needs to look like and blah, 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 it wasn't coming across, right? Usually it was something that I saw very clear structurally, visibly, okay, like a panel layout or like a pattern, or the description of like panel sizes and what I wanted that to mean and things like that, because the script went back and forth between things I had very, very strong ideas about because there was something thematically I wanted to connect with, panel size or panel reduction, where this page has got 7 and this one's got 6 and this one's got 5, this one's got 4 in a row, because that meant something thematically to the script. And then there were other pages where I did that other style where it's like, okay, I know it's going to be 4. You get a lot of freedom to do this here, here, and here, go nuts. But every once in a while, especially when it was something that I clearly saw in my head, but don't necessarily have the technical visual language to translate that in the script as clearly as I wanted to him, he might have a question where he's like, okay, can you draw that panel layout for me? And I'm like, maybe, I'm really nervous because I don't want you to see, so I'm like out there with a ruler and I'm like measuring centimeters. I'm like, okay, okay. I'm just trying to make it look as tight and okay and, not embarrassing as possible to, take a picture and send it to him. So he's not just laughing his head off at me that like, oh man, you don't know what you're doing, that kind of thing. So every once in a while there's that. So we were talking like all the time
Awesome.
and even at the end where, he'd be like, look, because he had more experience than me. And he's like, okay, so what I'm going to do here is you got 6 panels here. I'm going to cut it down to 5 and I'm going to show you why that's better. And he would do that. And then there's a back and forth. I'm like, okay, so now I've got to either cut this bit of dialogue or move it into another panel. And so there was kind of some morphing even at the end as we were putting it together. And yeah, I mean, we were in contact the entire time. And then when he was done, I got to work with Justin Birch when he was doing the lettering, and then I got to work with you and I were talking pre-recording about Casey Pierce, superstar of Source Point Press, writing the forward for me, and like just getting to interact with what comes down to the Source Point family on a whole bunch of different levels to bring this thing together, and it was awesome.
That's great. And then talk about, it's all said and done. What was the reaction and what was it like getting all the feedback and what was going on in your head with that happening?
So okay. So it's been amazing, and it's also been weird because it's not, there's not. It's just okay. One, it's a source or a small press book, so you're not going. It's not like you're going to get the same kind of media or fan feedback as a book that's published at 100,000 copies come out from one of the big two. But having said that, in the world of social media, like I'm on Instagram, and I started getting people reaching out right away, mostly wanting to know exactly what happens at the end, because there's a little bit of ambiguity there. And I actually started taking my favorite thing at the very beginning. So if we're going to talk about early reactions, my favorite thing was I started kind of keeping a mental tab on how many people thought it went one way and how many people thought very differently. And that final outcome. And if you read the book and you get to the end, you get to kind of make that interpretation itself. And it just kind of says a little bit about you as a reader, I think, whether you think Landon goes one way with this decision or the other way with this decision, monumental decision about the future of his life. And that was kind of fun to kind of keep track of. And then, so like you and I, again, we're talking pre-recording about how the final piece of like this dream come true puzzle still hasn't happened. Right. If I think about the day before I started and in my wildest dreams, what the whole process would be, it ends with being on the other side of a table at a con and signing a book and pitching the book and, that kind of thing, or sitting at a signing and getting to, do that with people coming in to get the book signed. And I didn't get to do that, right, because of the run-in with COVID, with when it was published, and so that part's still out there. So what happened instead is interviews like this. I've probably done triple, quadruple what I ever thought I was going to do, and so like a lot of my like reader interaction has come, from talking to people like you, or like if it's a live show, people who are in the stream, or then I say like, hey, come and see me on Instagram at J Douglas Writes, and you hit me up in the DMs and we will chat for a half an hour. I will chat your ear off to the point where you've got to go. You're like, oh, I know you're busy, but I've got this question about the book I read, and the way that usually turns out is I end up talking way too long, and they're like, okay, listen, I've got things to do. Goodbye. You've talked too long. So that's been a lot of fun. And people, okay, so in the end, I think my favorite reaction has been, if you read this book and you're a comic fan, there's the thing that's in there for you about the dark sci-fi tale like that. If you're a fan of comic books and those kind of stories, like this story is for you. But what's made me proudest and touched my heart the most is the people who are connecting to it on a much more existential level, right? Because if the themes are the themes of dreams deferred and the anxiety and dread that most of us manifest at some point in our life about the fact that time is slipping away and maybe the door is closed on a lot of things that we thought we had time for, but maybe don't. The idea of second chances. The people who are connecting to that, the people who are seeing that as a bit universal, whether they are a musician like Landon, or they are a writer with a dream like me, or they want to go dance in Chicago, right? It doesn't really matter. He is all of us, and it just manifests different for all of us. And the people who are connecting to it on that level and saying, you know, it meant something to them, they respect the mental health aspect of the book. Or I think my favorite thing that I've ever heard is I finished it and I went back and reread it right away. Because because it does, between what I had in the script and then definitely the brilliance of Adam Ferris, is there's a lot of clues. There's a lot of kind of hidden Easter eggs. There's a lot of ambiguity in the script and even ambiguity in the art, where you go back and read it again and you might actually think about a panel, a page, a sequence, or the whole book differently than you did the first time. And that's something that I loved, or I love as a reader. I want something, you know, as much as I dig a serialized monthly, right? The vast majority of them don't necessarily lend themselves to rereadability as well, for two reasons. One, because the business model is to get you to buy next month's issue anyway, not to reread last month's issue. And if it's a forever, you know, I don't know, 80 years of continuous issues Action Comics, or 40 years of it, whatever, or 50 years of it, Silver Age Marvel, like you go back and read 50 years or just the one arc, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to it. My favorite stories that I've ever read are series with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. 75 issues of Sandman, right? Or what is it? Like, is it 50 or 60 of Preacher? Or you know what I mean? And or 64 pages of this book that I wrote that when you get to the end, there's enough meat there to go back and you want to read it again, right?
Yeah. Even like 12 issues of Watchmen too. I've
for sure. Right, exactly. Right.
That's why, I love this media. I love comic books. You have your options for ongoing monthlies with the characters you love and new characters, but you also find those, whether it be a one shot, an Elseworlds, a What If, or somewhere from the Independents, and you just find that book. It's contained. You can read it, have your thoughts, put it down, think about it, reread it again, and have a completely different mindset of. That's what makes this hobby awesome. It truly does.
Truth. Yep, I'm with you.
So you also were able to have some variant covers. Once it came out, you had some variant covers. Then talk about those.
Yeah, so that's like another one of those fanboy moments, because that's not something that I planned. That's not something I asked for. That's not something I was even wishing for. That was like generated by, all three of them that were made were exclusives, and like that was other people reaching out to SourcePoint, reaching out to artists and saying like, we like this book. Do you think we could do a variant? And and they go through that process, which I don't even fully understand myself. And like, I'm not in on the ground floor. They're informing me later. So we're gonna do a variant of your book. What do you think? I'm like, I think that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And there's a SSCO exclusive cover that there's a few of those left, and you can see that like if you go to my IG account. I've got actually a direct link to that in the bio. There's only a couple of those left. And then there were the SCO exclusive covers by Esteban that sold out in like 48 hours. And I've got one right here. It's like a Donnie Darko homage variant. And then the other one was even more limited than this one. And it was hold on. It was a foil Virgin variant. And this was a gift from the shop that eventually should probably go on the wall.
That's awesome. Like seeing it there does it even more justice from like the actual photo. Like that's awesome.
So And that's just, I mean, that tickle. I mean, I was mentioning the whole early 90s foil cover boom, and that kind of, that's it right there, right? So that's nice. Yeah, and those just, I gave away one of these. I had two copies. I gave away one of my two copies. I mean, they're gone. You can find them on eBay every once in a while, which blows my mind too. I gave away one of these a couple of months ago, and then Esteban did. I just gave away. He took one of his last copies of this and actually hand painted a one of a kind remark over the top of it, and we just gave that away. And I was kind of hyping that as like the last parallel giveaway, because like I gave away a few signed copies of the regular cover. I'd given away one of the variants. I'd given away this one of a one in the entire world, hand painted one. And then he's like, that went really well. And I was like, yeah, it did. That was kind of fun too. So let's break some news on the show. He is planning on doing a second one,
Awesome.
a different design. So there will be one more, at least one more one of a kind hand painted variant covers out there in the world that I will be giving away probably later this spring. So if you have any interest in owning like an original piece of art from a ridiculously talented artist, and what I hope you think is a fairly cool book too, come and check me out at J. Douglas Writes. Come and give me a follow and stay tuned. And that will be coming probably later this spring.
Awesome. And I'm going to include your Instagram info in the description of this video. And then you sent me some links too. So I'll look
Yeah,
for those.
yeah, because like one of the things that I want to get across that I've really become aware of in this process is the amount of effort and the amount of love and the amount of time that goes into making indie comics. And I'm not even just talking about it like from my perspective of like what I did and what I went through, but like looking at like SourcePoint Press as this as a like a massively growing, rapidly indie comic company. Like they are blowing up. But when you set them as big as they're getting in the indie world, when you set them aside next to a big two or even like an Image or a Dark Horse, it's a tiny little speck in an ocean. And I mean, you get this book has got a price point of like $6.99, and that's like pretty good value for a rereadable 64 pages, fairly densely written. Because as you can tell, I can talk. So some of that transfers into the panels. That $7 is different in the world of indie comics than $7 towards Marvel and DC. And this is not me bashing Marvel and DC, because that's who I grew up on, right?
Of course, yeah.
But $7 in the indie world is spent differently and goes differently and goes further than a massive company with 80 years of infrastructure behind it and massive international corporations that actually own them on top of what they are. You spend your dollar for indie comics, you are literally putting food on tables, putting clothes on backs, and providing the means for people with stories to tell that without your dollar, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So like, if any of this has intrigued you at all, there's like a bunch of ways that you can do like a multi-level of support, right? Like if you want to go into your LCS and support them while supporting a small press publisher, while supporting me, you can do that. You can walk in there and you can give them the diamond order code, because they're not going to know my name. They're not going to know the name Parallel, and they might not even know who SourcePoint Press is, depending on where what shop you're going in. So if you can safely go into a shop, you can go up there and you can go up to the counter and you can say diamond order code. You can say FEB 20 1983. Easy to remember because that's Return of the Jedi year. FEB 20 1983, and if they want your business, they'll order you a book and it'll come in blah 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 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. If they don't, okay, you still get multi-level support. If I gave you that link. You can direct order from SourcePoint Press, and you're supporting small press. You're supporting an indie creator who wants to sell enough books where they'll let me do this again, and and you
Yeah.
can order digital copy, which is really cheap, or a paper copy from them that'll come in a bit of time. So I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to do that. And your support, just literally, if you're not somebody who reads indies or supports indies on the regular, it's kind of like I don't know. It's like it's literally like supporting local business or small business. It means something more because in the competitive landscape, it's harder and it takes longer. And again, nothing against the bigger companies, but there is more of an assembly line, more of a product being churned out, more of 80 years of infrastructure. Like I mentioned, this is literally a family. It started as a family. It's still a family, even though they're bigger, and it's a family working together to put out the absolute best stories that they can come up with so that you can enjoy. And so like your dollar is appreciated and used on a level that you really don't get that value, not only for the good, awesome story and art, but like the value for like what that dollar means in a different way than it doesn't necessarily mean in every business that you can give a dollar to.
Absolutely. It's the bang for your buck alone, like you said, $7 for one of the big two, and I'm not bashing those two either.
Yeah, yeah,
But
right. No,
you get a cliffhanger with fluff, for 6.99, $7, you get 64 pages of just of the whole story from beginning to end, and you know who doesn't want that? So I couldn't agree more. And the indie books have this is a great time, as I'm sure you know, for the indies, especially with horror and sci-fi. There's
yeah,
so many great stories being told right now, and like you said, not even just with Image and Dark Horse. You know, Boom, and there's Hero Tomorrow. There's Source Point Press. There's everything on Indiegogo and Kickstarter. There's so much out there, and if I'm trying to be able to get a good grasp on everything because I want to support a lot of these creators because they're creating some really good stories. So that's why another reason why when Sid said, "Hey, do you want someone from Source Point Press?" I'm like, absolutely, this is awesome.
yeah.
So this is and I'm going to leave, like I said, all this information that you sent me. I'm going to leave it in the description. I'm going to be, plugging stuff on, my Instagram as well. And to segue into that, you mentioned Instagram. The comic book community on Instagram, as you've probably found out, is amazing.
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of lucked into it because as a public school teacher, I have been very, very social media verse my whole career, right? That's way too many stories of teachers getting in trouble by posting the wrong thing and one mistake and blah, blah, blah. So I had a zero social media footprint before I signed my contract with Source Point Press. And part of the deal was, well, here's the other thing about indie, like so much more self-promotion, right? Again, you don't have a massive churning, there's no promotions media wing of small indie companies that are just going to take care of that for you. So like you got to do a lot of that on your own. And Trevor's like, okay, at a minimum, because I was averse. And Trevor's like, at a minimum, you got to dig into one and you got to build your base and you got to do this because it's going to be necessary. And so I did, even though I was very ignorant about like crowdfunding, I did information and crowdsource what my decision about where I was going to go. So I reached out to all those same former students, between the ages of, whatever teen to their late 20s. And I was like, okay, guys, what am I doing here? And they're like, Facebook is for the olds. Twitter is toxic. And at the time that I did this, it was like Instagram, this is pre-TikTok. So Instagram's the way you go. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And that's what I did. And then, coincidentally, it turns out to be a place where there's just a supportive and fascinating and really, really cool comics community. You know what? Multiple comics communities, right? Like,
Yeah.
and there's a place where, half the people I follow are just like posting their favorite Silver Age books from their collection. I'm like, ooh, and I'm hitting the player emoji on the thing as a response just as often as I'm, following a fellow indie creator and going, oh my God, look at that Kickstarter, look at that, piece of concept art. That's amazing too. And so I got really, really lucky that the kids pointed me in this direction because you're right. It's a heck of a communities that I consider myself lucky to be a part of.
Absolutely. And you said there's multiple like communities because there's the people who like the post, there's people who are the creators, the artists, the independent artists. And I've there's I've purchased from a local artist from the community who does he does prints, and he also does these paper mache sculptures which are phenomenal. Ralph Burrows, Rally Bar on Instagram. He does phenomenal work, and he's a
Yeah.
great member in the community too. And this just it's open. You know, I keep saying the best part of the pandemic for me has just been getting involved with this community because it was kind of I was almost like a one man show where I collected what I want. You know, I kind of kept it a little private to myself, but
Yeah.
being exposed to this community, the YouTube and Instagram, it's met so many great people, and it's really broadened my
Well,
comic book.
if you come over and give me a follow, or come over and check out my page, you will definitely notice that, especially earlier on in my posting, where there was like, pre-publishing, there's, I'm releasing a little tease of a piece of art that Adam sent me or stuff like that, or maybe this announcement for this date. But I couldn't resist, especially early on when there was less things to put out there about Parallel. Every 2 or 3 posts was, I went and grabbed something out of my personal collection and put it up there. And there might be a nicely framed with a little jungle background because of a house plant in the background, a first appearance of a Black Panther up there, and I post that. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't resist either. And there'll be some fun posts on there to look at, as well as good and exclusive Parallel content as well.
Yeah, it's a great escape with everything going on in the world. Go on to Instagram, look at your feed and see everything posted. It's truly great. And to kind of shift gears a little bit, pretty exciting. You're involved with the Ringo Awards, right?
Well, I don't know about involved, but like it kind of came to my attention that like some people were nominating Parallel and then nominating me for Best New Talent, and I was very flattered and very honored by that. Like I don't really have a frame of reference for like it's the nomination process right now. So like you can go to the Ringo Awards and you can go in there, and it's a pretty quick and easy process to nominate your favorite artist. And there's like categories that are half fan vote and half pro vote. And then there's a few categories that are just fan awards, and Best New Talent's one of them. And then there's like the, Best New Graphic Novel or something like that. And some people were saying, well, we're nominating Parallel, we're nominating you for Best New Talent, and maybe in the writer category and stuff like that. And that was just amazing. And I don't know how many votes it takes. I don't know what the threshold is. I could a whole bunch of people could write in for me, and I would be very honored and whatever, and I could still be 10,000 nominations short from being on the back. I don't know, but like if that was something, like if you read the book and you would like to do that, I mean, I would certainly be appreciative. That would be awesome. That would be quite an honor. But yeah, that kind of caught me off guard too, and I love that idea too. That's great.
Yeah, and for those who don't really know what the awards are, would you like to kind of
well, yeah, there's so there's they've been going since 2017. They're given out at Baltimore, right? So like you've got you got the Eisners at San Diego, and there's a couple other awards that are still going. Comics are tend to have, in a way that like the Emmys and the Tonys and the Academy Awards have decades and decades and decades of long-standing and long-running tradition. Even some of the more newer like entertainment awards are now 20, 30 years old or whatever. Comics tend to have like these tiny little runs where a show will have an award, but it'll only last a couple of years. And now, even though it's only been the Ringos, which have been going at Baltimore since 2017, it's actually one of the longer standing ones. I mean, obviously Eisner is a lot more than that, but so that's kind of cool, and that would be a heck of an honor. But it's given out at Baltimore, and it's Mike Wieringo, who the late great artist, is named after him, and he was an amazing guy. He actually, okay, so just pure fantasy, no expectation at all. Please do not aggregate what I'm about to say. If that were something where I did get the honor of getting on that nomination ballot, much less winning, good Lord, the connection I would have is he so he did a lot of stuff for the big two, but his creator-owned project that he did was this book called Telos, and it was like an all ages adventure fantasy story. Before that was a huge thing in the comics industry, a little bit before Scholastic got on board and started reprinting Bone. And this was back when I was teaching fourth grade. And Telos was one of the first two books that I brought into my classroom and put in front of my reluctant readers and really made a difference in a lot of young readers' lives, because when you are at a lower reading level than you are supposed to be by whatever grade, there's a stigma and there's a shame of having to read down, right? Everybody's reading in class and you're reading a first grade book and you're in fourth grade. It actually exacerbates the problem, and those kids just end up not reading. They end up faking it, either digging in their heels and just shutting down on reading as even a concept, or like reading a Harry Potter book upside down and pretending it's actually happening. And what I found pretty early on in my career was, if you put a comic in front of a kid at an age appropriate level, doesn't matter because it's a comic and that makes it cool. And suddenly you've got these kids that aren't going to read, and now they are. And it was beautiful. And Telos, by Ringo as the artist, was one of the first ones. So that's actually that would be actually kind of special to be involved with the award named after him for this, me pursuing my dream, because it really, really, as a teacher, was kind of a seminal moment for me. And he was like the first artist that was in the room that was actually doing that, whether he knew it or
not. That's awesome. And that's more reason why that link will be in this description as well. Cause let's make this happen. Why not? This is what this community is all about, supporting, each other. And I can't wait to get this out there, because this is so many great opportunities with this. And I'm excited. I'm excited to read this. I've read the first half. I am invested, and I can't read to finish it, and I can't wait to reread it, and have the creators, recognized for their accomplishments is, just an awesome thing. So I'm all on board with this. I'm going to be, pushing this like heck, because this is awesome.
Cool. Thank you so much.
And other than that, if elevator pitch, or if there's someone who's kind of on the fence, what would you do to get that person on the right side of the fence to check out Parallel?
This is, well, okay, let's bang for your buck. 64-page one shot. You get to sit down, you get lost in this book. It is a dark, twisted, but fun sci-fi tale about a dude going through his quarter life crisis, where he gave up his dreams of music in his early 20s, thinking he had all the time in the world, falls into that malaise at so much of this dude, wakes up pushing 30, and he is in that rut. What's the difference between you and me and him? And the dread and the existential crisis that we go through, all of us at some point in our lives. The difference is it manifests in his brain by seeing visions and hearing voices of an alternate reality version of him that lived the life he wished he did. And this other version of him is offering him that second chance that so many of us don't get. Big problem, the cost. The cost of that second chance is not, I repeat, not good for our Landon's mental health and physical health in the here and now. And what it takes to get to this other world, this thing that he's always wanted. Ooh, dark, a little scary, and a little intense, and some pretty crazy crescendos in the second half. And you got to find out what happened, what decision he finally makes at the end. And that's where some of that ambiguity comes in. There's my pitch.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I end the interview right now, but that's great. If that doesn't get anyone interested, especially people who are into comics and the good stories, good storytelling, that's great. And I guess, is there anything else looking ahead? I know we're in the the midst of a pandemic still, but do you have any projects? You thank you for announcing the new variant coming out, but are
Yeah.
there any other releases,
Yeah, well,
announcements?
I've got a new book that a first issue is written and four issues are plotted and the research is done and the bios are written. I'm just kind of waiting for the green light from SourcePoint. So honestly, the more copies of Parallel I sell, getting on that Ringo nomination ballot, those are all things that probably would like look good and help them make that decision. It's actually a project that means a lot to me. It's dedicated to my late grandmother and all the young ladies who have come in and out of my classroom over the years who have struggled with identity and struggled with being themselves. It's a post World War II small town story with a superhero twist. So there's just like your dark sci-fi twist. That's the comic book piece, but like pretty deep and powerful themes there about identity, about race, about gender, and about being yourself when the world doesn't necessarily want to let you be that. So that's kind of my dream right now is, I fulfilled this lifelong dream, but now I'm greedy and I want to do it again.
More.
So yeah, like there's another reason to support. Like if you go buy a copy, that's another dollar in their pocket. It looks good on my end, and they're more likely to say yes to this, to my second dream.
Awesome, awesome, Jason. Thank you so much for taking time doing the interview. This was great, and I really appreciate uh, talking about this book that I think just by reading the first half, everyone should check out because I'm really invested. So thank you so much for stopping by, and thank you for your time. And I'm once again, I'm going to be pushing all this in the description. Everyone, please go check out his Instagram, check out the nomination for the Ringo Awards, check out SourcePoint Press. They are really doing a lot with comic books, and they've been doing a lot for the past 3 years, and there's no stopping them right now. So definitely go check them out. Go support Jason, and everyone, thank you so much. This has been a great time, and have a nice rest of the day, guys.